Hey guys. Part 2. What if Naruto became a heroic spirit? War. War never changes. It warps you, twists you until you're little more than a shell of your former self. War is ugly. It forces you to choose, to decide who lives, who dies. War is cruel. It takes everything from you. I should know. I already fought and won. I died. Now I've been dragged into another by an unruly girl, as a most unlikely caster. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 4. An Unsightly Servant. An unsightly servant. Shiro Amiya had just summoned death. Through a series of events that even now he didn't completely understand, he'd stumbled upon it, travesty through sheer happenstance. A magic circle in his shed. Of course it had always been there, carved into the floor during the last Grail War. Shiro, of course, had no way of knowing any of this when he uncovered it. And he had found it. Not through any sense of danger or risk on his part, but mere chance. Blind bloody luck had brought him here while he was cleaning. Ludicrous as might sound, this was indeed the case. In another reality his flight from Lancer would have inevitably drawn him here, to his destiny. But not in this one. Neither plight nor peril had brought him to this moment, and they certainly hadn't bestowed the strange marks now etched onto the back of his hand. He had no way of knowing what he'd just been dragged into. In this world, the Grail had been altered. Changed by the summoning of a new caster. A slight variation in what should have been the same story. A constant in many worlds, this time however, something changed. Be it a whim from the throne of heroes or the will of the as of yet unborn Ngramenu, Saber did indeed respond to his accidental summons. With the catalyst of Avalon bound within his chest, she had no choice. Shiro couldn't summon another servant if he'd tried. The King of Knights was an immutable pillar that would always be present in every scenario. And today she heeded his call, in all her mighty glory. It was not the Saber one might have expected. What was once pure was twisted. Noble ideals were trampled. Hope withered. Ack. Could light be black? She arrived in a flare of what could only be called such. Indeed, the raw force behind her sudden arrival hurled Shiro from the shed as though he weighed no more than a doll. He crashed to the ground with a grunt, only narrowly managing to shield his face as his body skidded wildly across the ground. Ears ringing, skin tingling from the blast, he was only distantly aware of the aftermath. His back crashed against a fence, his body curled reflexively inward against the impact before the rest of his senses finally reasserted themselves. Ouch, what the hell? Clank. She emerged. A warrior beyond compare. Stepped from darkness into the light. Pale of face with haunting golden eyes, with hair the color of straw. A maiden clad in darkness, bearing a corrupted sword at her side. Nebulous streamers of shadows clung to the blade, obscuring its true identity from the eyes of those who would pry. With her came heavy armor forged from midnight itself, dark as pitch and thrice as somber. She was, in a word, made for war. Still, something about her felt wrong. Twisted. Corrupted. The very air itself seemed to shudder around her, not quite in fear, but with sorrow. This woman was darkness incarnate. And she was looking at him. She was not pleased. You. A bitter laugh escaped her, followed by the strangely flat yet musical voice, her voice, plucking at his ears. A note of despair entered her words, pitching them towards despair. Of course it would be you. Why have the face seen fit to curse me so? Have I not suffered enough? Eh? Shiro managed eloquently. The woman tensed. Those eerie gold eyes blazed, and for a moment, he wondered if she would attack him. No, it's nothing. After a moment, Tyrant sighed wearily, shaking her head. Clearly, I have responded to your summons. Shiro wondered about that. Truly, he did. It didn't help that he had absolute no idea what was going on here. Oi, wait a second. Look, whoever you are, I'm really not sure what this is all about. Enough. The blonde snarled at him. I grow tired of this meaningless drivel. With a grunt, she planted her tainted blade in the soil between them. "Servant saber," she declared. "Point me at the enemy, master." Golden orbs narrowed to stern slits of wrath. "I will destroy them." Leagues away in the Einsburn castle. "More tea, Naruto Onii-chan?" Castor stifled a small sigh in the back of his throat, and narrowly resisted the urge to bring a raisin shuriken down upon the one who just called him that. Naruto Onii-chan? Just what kind of fantasy was she concocting? Oh. A younger incarnation would have protested immediately upon being called such a thing. He'd been called all manner of names and titles when he walked among the living: hero, demon, friend, monster, partner, lover, even towards the end of his life. But Onii-chan? He honestly couldn't recall ever hearing that one before. If so, he'd forgotten. The closest he'd come to that was when a then young Kanenhammer calling him Naruto and I. That was something entirely different. No, it didn't bother him. It didn't bother him. It didn't bother him at all. It didn't bothered him a lot. "You're up to something, aren't you, Ilya?" he deadpanned. Somehow, the homunculus projected a peaceful aura as she reclined in her chair. Naruto was vaguely reminded of a queen. No, not a queen, for Rin's unique brand of haughtiness firmly claimed that title, rather. A princess regarding him from her gilded throne. A dainty hand raised her own teacup to her lips, from whence she took the faintest of sips. Setting the saucer down with infinite gentleness, the strange not child favored him with a small smile. She'd worn that very same smile when she'd requested this audience with them. In her own mansion, no less. Why, whatever do you mean, Onii-chan? Despite Naruto's utmost efforts, his right eye twitched. See? Frowning, he thrust a finger at her. That. Why the hell are you doing that? Me? Ilya tilted her head. I'm not doing anything, Onii-chan. Yes, you are. Retracting his arm, the blonde glowered at his ally. You're doing it right now. Am I? Fine. She wanted to play coy. Best to get this out of the way, then. Closing his eyes, Castor flipped his switch. His features settling into a blank mask, the blonde pushed down against the table and stood, towered over her. It was almost painfully easy to shut everything off. To turn cruel. He channeled the faintest amount of energy to his eyes, revealing their true nature. Then he ceased masking his chakra signature. It wasn't an overt change. You'd have to possess a modicum of sensing capabilities to even remotely understand what just transpired. Rin certainly did, judging by the slight widening of her eyes. To her, his once warm prana likely felt as though it had plunged into Arctic water. In a word, cold. Perhaps Ilya recognized the change, because her own smile faded to a mere sliver. Ah. Was she afraid? Good. This was the monster who'd torn down the White Setsa army, the creature who'd dragged Kagaya to the underworld kicking and screaming. It was the face of a young man who'd thrown everything away to win. His bonds. His companions. Even his own life. I'm not your brother, Ilya. The words were sharper than any blade, meant to cut through her deceit like a hot knife to butter. I only spared you to win this war. Ilya flinched. He expected anger. Disbelief at the very least. Irritation at having her ruse torn down. Ilyasville von Einsburn was full of surprises. But that would make me so sad, Onii-chan. Irk. Naruto's heart bucked in his chest. I just took critical damage. Innocent red eyes brimmed with tears, regarding him without so much as a sliver of deceit. She was sorrow personified. No, more than that. This was the face of a child despite not being a child who'd reached out for comfort, only to be backhanded by his reply. He may as well have struck her face. That would have stung less. Her words held no magic. Not a drop of prana. Yet somehow, she unmanned him with a single look. In that moment it didn't matter how powerful he'd become, nor how he hardened his soul. Old habits were still hard to shake. He was forced to admit his defeat on this matter. She'd bested him, without raising a hand or declaring a single command. His body sat back down without thinking. Damn. He just couldn't do it. He couldn't be cruel to her. Yikes. He managed, slumping in his seat. You could win the Holy Grail war with that look. Huh? Ilya blinked, dabbing tears from her eyes with the sleeve. What look? Did she really not understand what she'd just done? Stowaway. Oh dear. He didn't have to look to know his master was glaring. No, Naruto's mind railed. No, that's not it at all, Rin. She's dangerous. This one is dangerous. In every sense of the bloody word. Especially that smile. It was too good. Too pure. It was a child's smile, hopeful, yet infinitely miserable all the same. Utterly devoid of any ill intentions towards them. Castor's deep-rooted instincts howled otherwise. Lies. Trickery. Only a fool would trust that smile. No way in hell. Suspicious. Very suspicious. He'd seen that same look many a time on many a woman long before he'd ever encountered the wee slip of a girl known as Iliasville von Einsburn, and he knew that damned smile promised mischief or madness. Likely both. Given her untenable position in this little arrangement of theirs, Naruto suspected the former. Even if she was an ally. Regardless, he'd lost this bout. By the log, he was determined to win the next one. What are you, a Lilican? Rin deadpanned, reminding him of his own imminent peril. Castor, I'm disappointed in you. Why did I have to summon such an unsightly servant? Naruto bristled. Don't give me that look, Rin. He sighed, palming his forehead. You know you're the only girl for me. Till death do us part, remember? In hindsight, perhaps he'd been a tad too free with his choice of words there. Somewhere in the back of Rin's brilliant mind, something clicked. The noise that emerged could scarcely be called a squeak. Ha! The Tosaka heiress had never given his oath much thought until now, but yes, now that she thought about it, Castor had mentioned the latter when he'd sworn his services to her. Wait! Aqua orbs widened to the size of dinner plates. Till death do us part? What had he meant by that? On paper his words made perfect sense as an oath of allegiance, but in her panic, her mind leaped to the most outrageous conclusion as was often its wont. Just what kind of proposal was that anyway? They barely even knew one another. Of course, Castor was dashing in his own bumbling way, and he'd already saved her life 3 times at the risk of his own, and oh dear God. Naruto, for his part, was more than content to watch the black cat squirm. Even if that hadn't been his initial intention. Blushing was a good look for her chair? Castor nimbly ducked just as Rin's seat sailed toward him at blistering speeds. Instinct compelled him to move more than anything else, not for fear of losing his head. He did not, after all, enjoy having furniture thrown at him. Deprived of its target, the piece of furniture rocketed through a window, instead blasting a hole in the reinforced glass before careening to the grass below. Distantly, Naruto heard Ilya mutter something about people putting holes in her house, but he paid it little heed. His attention was decidedly elsewhere. Rather, he was focused on the embarrassed Magus before him. Where did that line come from, Castor? For crying out loud, it was a compliment, Rin-chan. Why you throwin' things? The string of syllables that followed could barely be called Japanese. Stupidity o Naruto shutapihidia. From his constant vigil near the entrance to the foyer, Berserker made a noise eerily similar to laughter. Naruto groaned. Why did it feel like the whole world was against him these days? Blasted girls. Both of you. I give up. Someone fill this damn thing already. I'm parched. Reluctantly, he offered his teacup. Impossibly, Ilya brightened. Right away. Stella. Yes, mistress. One of Ilya's 2 maids made herself known then, quietly intruding past the fuming Rin with a teapot. This one was, Lacerit? No, that was the one with shorter hair and larger assets. This one, He couldn't remember. Something starting with an S, if he recalled correctly. Sarah? Sapphire? Sel? No. Sella. Yes, that was it. Slim of stature with the same striking ruby eyes of her mistress, Her hair was white as snow, of such length that she nearly whipped him in the face with it when she poured his tea. He suspected that was deliberate on her part. She would have been pretty, if she wasn't so intent on scowling at Rin. No, she was definitely glaring at him. Ah! He'd almost forgotten. So this was what hate felt like. For a moment there, he honestly a prank. Disrespect he could tolerate, but to treat Rin poorly? Inexcusable. 'Twas a strange thing indeed, to come into the lair of an enemy only to be waited on hand and foot by said enemy's maids. Morseal when said maids wanted you dead. Then that very maid went and pressed the wrong button. Be grateful, swine. Sella hissed in his ear as he drank. I'd rather serve you swill. Rin nearly slung a gander at her on the spot. Why you? Naruto's reaction beat her to it by a mile. Feigning surprise, Castor turned his head and spat the contents of his cup in Stella's direction. The maid yelped in disbelief as she suddenly found herself doused from head to toe in the semi-sweet liquid, leaving her outfit soaked through and through. Her outfit rendered nearly transparent by the unexpected deluge, she frantically attempted to cover herself with her hands, which only made things worse. Naruto saw the mounting anger in her eyes and tried to restrain a snicker of his own. He failed horribly. Well, Stella was certainly going to murder him for this. Or try to. I'm so sorry. He offered a decidedly false smile. Had to sneeze. The slow reddening of Stella's face was a sight to behold. You. Era, why are you so flustered? Tosaka Rin. Rin watched with no small amount of amusement as a fierce flush inexorably crept up the albino's pale neck and stole across her once stern visage. Within moments her face was red as a rose, nearly the same shade of her own ruby-red eyes. Her expression was just icing on the cake. The once unflinchable maiden stood in complete disarray, her head swiveling back and forth as she panicked like a small child, unable to decide who to lay the blame on. Castor for his blatant defiance? Or Rin for her laughter? Ilia, for her part, seemed content to let this small drama unfold, though she too wore a slight flush of her own. Inevitably, Stella finally made her decision. You perverted brute! I'll kill you! I'd like to see you try it? For all his foresight, Naruto wasn't expecting the mad maid to actually pounce on him. To her credit, either did Rin. Death Taozine. With that garbled sentence and a blood-curdling shriek, Stella slammed into Castor, sending the two of them tumbling to the floor. Straddling him, the homunculus wrapped both hands around his throat and squeezed with all her might. Throughout it all, Naruto didn't bat an eyelash. It would have been terrifying, if he wasn't so far beyond her ken. In another life, her fury would have been terrifying. As a mortal, he would have had the life choked out of him before he could hope to muster even the faintest resistance. Now, as it stood, Stella would have had better luck strangling a log. Still, as entertaining as her fury might be, this was an exceedingly awkward position, and he really should do something about it. In the end, he needn't have bothered. Stella, Ilia chastised the older woman with a hint of steel shining through her smile, that is no way to treat our guests. Get off him and apologize. Her guardian jerked back, aghast. But my lady. Apologize. The elder maid nearly balked at the command, but complied with a bow regardless. As you command, mistress, she demurred. My apologies. Excuse me? Naruto grinned. Ah, no worries. You're forgiven. I'll kill him, she growled, stomping off. I'll kill him. I'll kill him, I swear by all the gods above and below I am going to kill him. Castor stifled another sigh. Life was a strange thing, indeed. He'd been the one to form this alliance, after all. He just hadn't expected the Ainsburn to take to it so aptly. Much less the Oniai-chan bit. Still, if Ilia truly wanted to poison him or some such, she was going to be sorely disappointed. His immunity skill rendered even the most potent toxins moot. If she sought to subvert his allegiance, and she might well be, she'd be in for another shock. He'd already sworn his staff and sword to Rin for the duration of this war. Not only that, but his life. He had given Tosaka his word. His nindo. His oath. He would be her servant until death or victory parted them. It wasn't a whim, rather a fact. He could no longer change his mind even if he wanted to. Which he didn't. It was a power that transcended even that of the command spells. Even if some spell shattered his mind and his sanity were lost, his body would never betray Rin. If there was only one certainty to be had in this brave new world, it was this. Every choice had a consequence. Every action, an equal and opposite reaction. If you saved someone, you allowed someone else to die. Conversely, saving that one life might spare countless others. The opposite was also true. You couldn't save everyone. To believe so was sheer folly. He made the mistake firsthand, slinging about the grandiose claim that he wouldn't let any of his friends die during the war. Then came Niji. And the others. Sasuke. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura. One by one they fell, until no one remained by his side. Did he regret his actions? Certainly. But undo them? No. Never. For all he'd suffered, he knew he could never bring himself to change the way he'd lived his life. He just wanted to make things right. This wish was his one and only chance to redeem himself. To go back to that horrible moment where it all went wrong. Would he be able to save everyone? Certainly not. But could he save most of them? Naruto didn't know. There was no way of knowing. You just had to accept reality and move on. In a sense, Castor also realized that he'd been saved as well. He understood on a fundamental level that this body, a form that shouldn't exist, wasn't his own. His physical state was sustained by Rin's prana, nothing more. Yet he retained full access to his techniques and a few new ones he'd thought up besides. By all rights he should be relieved. He'd received a reprieve from death, a stay on his sentence when he'd been plucked out of that inky blackness. He would kill her enemies for her, and he would have his wish. But a child, rather someone in the form of a child? No. He couldn't. Even after all he'd done, after what he'd become, a slim vestige of humanity held him back. Which brought him to his present predicament. This. In sparing Ilya's life, he'd forced their hand. He'd be working with others again? Could he bring himself to do it? To risk losing comrades? Would he? Now that we've gotten that out of the way, Rin began, claiming herself a secondary seat across the table. Shall we commence our strategy meeting? Right, that was why they were here in the first place, wasn't it? As you wish. Ilya inclined her head in a demure nod. Then she clapped her hands. Berserker! The earth rattled mightily as her servants simply walked towards and through the nearest wall to join them. Much to the Einsburn's consternation. Berserker! The door! Use the door next time! The giant grunted in wordless apology. Fine, just don't do it again. Why is he here? Rin posited. Berserker goes everywhere I go. The homunculi informed them sweetly, preening. Is that a problem? Naruto recognized the unspoken jab a mile away even as Rin scooted closer to him, positioning herself just so in case of an attack. Seemed there was still some bad blood between Beauty and the Beast. Not that he blamed her. Berserker had nearly cut Rin down during their duel in the park, and certainly would have if not for his timely intervention. Hell, that massive hunk of sharpened stone would cleave even him in half if its owner ever managed to land a solid hit. If the information he'd gleaned from the Throne of Heroes spoke true, then this was Heracles himself. Not someone to be trifled with. Of course she'd be uncomfortable around him. But he's a berserker. Rin was pointing out with a touch of exasperation as he came back to himself. Can he even understand us while under mad enhancement? He understands more than you think. Ilya reassured her. You have nothing to worry about. Unless you're afraid? A dark cloud settled over Tosaka's head. Why, you little? I should have had Castor cut your thr. Crunch! The sharpened edge of Naruto's staff slammed into the floor with monstrous force, physically splitting the stone in twine. The act caused both girls to jump in their respective seats. Having finally regained their attention, the sarcastic servant rose from his seat and claimed another, this one firmly between the two of them. Another tap of his staff followed, repairing the wound he'd left in the pavement. In a single impossible movement he reached around the table to pick up Ilya, chair and all, and place her next to Rin. Only then did his ice blue eyes turn to them. "That's enough, the both of you," he growled. "We're allies, remember, Rin? Act like it. And Ilya, threats are unbecoming of you." Ilya's expression turned sheepish. "Sorry, Oni-chan." "Well, so long as you understand." "Good, good." Nodding, he banished his weapon and crossed both arms before his chest. "Now let's continue. What kind of defenses do we have? Who is our first target? Do we know the identities of our enemies?" Putting the matter of strategy aside, he'd the strangest feeling that if he hadn't intervened, Berserker would have done something. He couldn't explain why. Heracles. Was that man truly a mindless brute? Naruto chose to hold his tongue in that aspect. Without his reality marble or any of his tricks, he would have been ground to paste in a contest of sheer strength. As it stood, Berserker had managed to injure him during that bout. He was just good at hiding his wounds. Even now his recently fractured ribs throbbed quietly. This creature could kill him if he ever let his guard down. The same could be said of him. Should he ever recover his sanity, he might become even more lethal. Even his creation of all things wouldn't be able to save him if that monster got his hands on him. Maybe it would have been safer to slay him after all. If his morals hadn't intervened, they wouldn't be having this conversation in the first palsy. Perhaps sensing his gaze, the giant's mismatching eyes swiveled to find his. Naruto inclined his head, and to his amusement, Heracles did the same. In that moment, man and beast shared an understanding. An accord between two warriors. Well met. That aside, we should prepare. Rin interjected, counting off her hand. Even with this alliance, she nearly choked on the word. Our enemies in this war are archer, rider, assassin, saber. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in against their newfound alliance. Saber's obviously the most dangerous, excluding our own servants, so I believe we should target their master first. Ilya perked up. I agree. That aside, you forgot to mention Lancer. Aha! That guy? Naruto perked up at the mention of the latter, spurred by the short-lived memory of his clone's encounter. I already met him. Got real close and personal with his noble phantasm. Red spear that goes straight for your heart and fucks with casualty. Gibalg, I think it was. Pretty sure he's the Irish version of Heracles over there. Kuchulin, basically. Not someone I'd like to fight alone. Heracles grunted. The girl's head snapped toward him. Weh/ha. It's just as I said. Naruto reiterated. Did I stutter? When did you fight him? Rin frowned. You were with me the entire time. That's easy. It would have been so easy to simply tell rather than show, but for some reason he was feeling impish. Rising from his seat, he crossed his hands and channeled a bit of chakra. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. To her credit, Ilya detected the sudden swell of energy well before Castor spoke up. To Rin's eyes, twin plumes of smoke echoed Naruto's words. When it cleared, a pair of identical copies stood on either side of the blonde, flanking him. The original crossed both arms before his chest, content to watch. Ah, surprise. He never grew tired of that. Tosaka's reaction was so pronounced as to be considered comical. Poor Ilya seemed to be holding herself together in any case, though the slight twitch of her mouth suggested she too hadn't expected this outcome. TT2 of them? Castor, how on earth did you? It's a skill of mine. I can create more if I want, master. He dropped the hint with a sly smile. Might tax your reserves though, if I use it in conjunction with creation of all things. Creation of all things? Naruto cursed himself for his slip of the tongue. Unbeknownst to him, Ilya's eyes lit up. Castor scarcely noticed. Damn it. He hadn't wanted to reveal that yet. A ninja prided themselves on secrecy and stealth. Though he'd been summoned as Castor, the blonde was loath to reveal his techniques or mysteries to the outside world. Shadow clones were an exception, if only because he felt certain no one could replicate the technique to his level without perishing in the process. But creation of all things was a recent skill, one he'd acquired towards the end of his life. Granted, if used properly, it held a great potential for good, but the wrong hands it could be an absolute terror. One look at Rin told him she wouldn't be satisfied with his silence now. No escape there. You use jewel magic, right? Rin blinked. Yes, she relented reluctantly, but I don't see how that's prevalent to what you watch. Blue eyes flickered into violet, and the Tosaka heiress winced slightly as Castor pulled more prana from her circuits than usual. Clink. Not a heartbeat later, she found a flawless sapphire in her lap. Rin's mouth went dry at the unspoken insinuation. Just how many could he make? Dozens? Hundreds? Thousands? No, he'd said it would tax her reserves. If he meant what she thought, however, this war was hers. She possessed a servant who just revealed himself to be capable of duplication on an obscene scale, a man who wielded multiple noble phantasms and a reality marble. A warrior with multiple skills, capable of going toe-to-toe with Berserker and winning. Someone who could create endless amounts of jewels for her, exponentially increasing her stock for the duration of the war. And all without fear of exhausting her own funds. She nearly giggled outright at the thought. Truly, it seemed that this war belonged to her. She would have to tread careful where Saber was concerned, because who knew what kind of monster had been summoned this time around, but if she played her cards right, the thought left her giddy with excitement. Ha! 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 Oh, master, Naruto drawled. That's a scary face you've got there. Why, whatever do you mean, Castor? I'm just happy. Still wearing that sickly sweet smile and dark aura like a fell shroud, she turned to face Castor, noting for the first time the faintest look of concern in the eyes of her servant. I retract my earlier statement. You're a marvelous servant. I foresee great things from you. Provided we work together, of course. Naruto felt a cold chill come over him. To think, he thought Ilya was dangerous. Tosaka Rin made the eyes burn pale by comparison. Ah, he truly did have a conniving little magus for a master. Hey, if you're gonna use me for my body, at least take me on a second date. He sighed. Duly noted. Rin chirped. Rest assured, I'll make very, very good use of you in the next few days. Irk. Perhaps realizing that the conversation was turning away from her, Ilya coughed quietly. I'll thank you to remember that I'm here too, she reminded them. Naruto quietly thanked the gods above and below. Right. Strategy. Let's do that. Time blurred by as the three of them made their plans for the war to come. Battle lines were drawn. Bounded fields erected. Strengths and weaknesses ruthlessly taken apart. Plans dissected, put back together, only to be torn apart once again when someone pointed out their flaws. Noble phantasms such as Heracles' God Hand and Naruto's clones were discussed loudly and at great length. Debates given, counterpoints offered. Hours fell to cutting words and insistent arguments, and all the while the horizon steadily brightened until at last. You've got to be kidding me. Morning already? Dawn came before any of them realized it. As fellow servants, Naruto and Heracles had no conventional need for rest. They could simply return to spiritual form to recover. The same could not be said for their masters. While either Ilya nor Rin had succumbed to sleep as of yet, one could clearly see it was only a matter of time before they crashed. Naruto himself had half a mind to take his stubborn master home right then and there, but I'd to discuss a personal matter with Castor, Ilya declared suddenly. Alone. Castor had a fair idea of what that matter might be. Rin snapped back to wakefulness with a snarl. If you think for 1 second that I'm going to leave you alone with my... It's fine, Rin. The blonde interjected with a raised hand. I can handle myself. After all, Berserker isn't going to leave this room either, is he? Heracles conceded the point with a wordless rumble. Just wait outside, Naruto urged. I'll send a clone with you. Very well. She relented, shoulders slumping. But, her eyes burned with inner fire, you have 1 minute. Nothing more. I'm very certain that's all we'll need. Ilya agreed, surprisingly mature. Thank you? Rin's only response was to slam the door as hard as she could. And just like that, Ilya von Einsburn had her wish. At first, neither dared to break the silence. Naruto didn't much blame her. Rin, he could understand. Not so Ilya. For the life of him, he couldn't figure out what the child wanted from him. Even after she'd revealed her true age to them, he still had trouble believing it. Just what was wrong with her body that she'd aged so slowly? If he hadn't possessed these eyes, he wouldn't believe it. When he looked at her with them, he sensed no ill intent. Only adoration? For better or worse, it appeared that her newfound affection for him was genuine. Why? Because he'd bested Berserker? Because he'd spared her life? Because he'd declared that life to have worth? Or did she simply intend to use him with the intent of turning on him at the last instant? He was well prepared in any case of such treachery, but he wasn't willing to unleash those mysteries unless absolutely certain. This was just too troublesome. So? He posited warily, careful to keep one eye on Berserker at all times. What is it you want from me, exactly, Einsburn? Please, Oniai-chan. Just call me Ilya. Harsh blue eyes narrowed coldly. That wasn't an answer. The homunculus huffed and puffed out her cheeks at that remark. Mo, don't be rude. He had an inkling of what she wanted, but again, he refused to speak it unless absolutely certain. He could, in theory, repair any inefficiencies in her body given the nature of his mark if asked, but would he? For a stranger he barely knew, yet allied with regardless? Once, in the past, he would have jumped at the chance to do some good. But now… In the end, he decided to take the road less traveled. I'll only ask you one more time, Naruto warned. Speak now or forever hold your peace. What do you want from me? Surprisingly, Ilya answered him readily. A tiny hand took hold of the hem of his robe. Your skill, creation of all things. Can you create anything with it? Well, this is unexpected. What are you after? Castor arched an eyebrow. In theory, yes. Why? Oh. Good. Ilya deflated visibly at his reply, tension draining out of her like water from a broken sieve. Castor tensed regardless, expecting a ludicrous demand to follow. Perhaps sensing his master's discomfort, Berserker shifted. Even then her request nearly floored Naruto outright. Her words, little more than a whisper, emerged. Can you create a new body for me? Chapter 5, A Fool's Hope. Castor regarded the circle he'd traced with trepidation. Well, shit, he muttered. Hope I didn't screw anything up. If he had made even the slightest mistake, this wouldn't be pretty. He'd spent the last few hours painstakingly adjusting it to his standards, exacting in his measurements, knowing what would transpire if he failed. If he hadn't been summoned as Castor this time around, he wouldn't have possessed the means to even attempt such a ritual in the first place. Part of him wondered why he was going through with it at all. This was illogical. In theory, it shouldn't be possible for him to summon a servant at all if the respective classes had already been chosen earlier in the war. He too was a servant, after all. A servant who had ensured his master would sleep through this. Perhaps that was cowardly of him, to make Rin and Ilya sleep for such a long period of time. Also, he could work. Would Rin view this as a betrayal? Naruto hoped not. This was, after all, for her sake as much as his. It would be so easy to attempt the ritual. He had more than enough power. And they needed another ally. His battle with Berserker had proven a revelation of sorts. For all the power he carried in this form, he was very much a glass cannon when it came to the stronger servants. A solid hit from someone like Saber might very break him if he was caught unprepared. The great giant might be their ally for now, but who was to say things wouldn't turn? The grounds of Ilya's abode were rich with energy. He couldn't think of a better place to try a dangerous ritual, beyond that forsaken temple. And his senses told him there was most certainly a servant residing there. No. It was now or never. A thorn of doubt held him back. The idea of having someone beholden to him grew appalling the more he dwelled on it. Even in his current state, He had no desire to shackle another being to him against his will. That aside, he had no idea what he might summon. In theory it should be Assassin, the last remaining servant in the war. Or it might be another caster. The thought made him shudder. He had access to materials he never would have thought of using. His power was at its utmost limits, swelled by Rin's prana. Indeed, creating a new body for Ilya had barely impacted his reserves at all. Dispelling a handful of his reconnaissance clones had been more than enough to top him off again. By rights, he should be able to break the rules at least once without the system coming down on him. Regardless of who or what he summoned, another ally in this war would be invaluable. Yet something made him hesitate. Do I dare? The silence of night gave no answers. Indeed, it almost seemed to mock him for his indecision. Why was he hesitating? Morals aside, he'd done this for a noble purpose. For Rin. For victory. If it failed, then it failed. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain. If by some chance whatever he summoned rebelled, or couldn't be controlled, then he would accept responsibility and slay them. That was his duty as a summoner, after all. A single attempt, one final effort. All or nothing. It would be over in an instant. So why hadn't he moved? Because he was afraid. As much as he loathed to admit it, he feared failure. The promise of a wish, a chance to reset his fate, was too promising to ignore. Yet, from what he'd seen, the competition was just too stiff for him to abide by his own strength. Perhaps had he been summoned as rider or assassin, Castor would have held more confidence in his chances. The throne had given him enough information for him to realize the severity of the task ahead, and the enormity of what he faced. There was no need to falter. His eyebrow twitched. Fuck it! Leveling his staff at the circle, he channeled as much energy as he dared. Too much, and he risked blowing his own arm off. Too little and the summoning wouldn't take, or worse, he'd end up with a subpar ally. He lacked any sort of catalyst to aid him in this. Thus, this. Immediately the inscriptions pulsed, burning an eerie blue. Azure light lit the grove, casting him in cerulean relief. Slowly, carefully, Castor began a chant, imbuing the words with sound and power. Even a foe or demi-servant would do. Something. Anything to help them reach the goal. Perhaps if he was lucky, he'd pull someone from his era, though he doubted his chances. No, he needed to call a frontline fighter, somewhere of unquestionable skill and loyalty, or even devotion. With a sharp click, he drove his weapon into the ground. Arise! Remarkably, something answered. Cold light briefly blazed night into day. Frost licked at his feet, seeking to sap his strength. Pain burned across his hand, informing him he'd succeeded. Not in the way he'd expected. No. Not in the least. This was new. Oh, fuck me. He groaned at the sight of them. Who in the blue hell are you? On bent knee, the newcomer rose for him. She was beautiful to say the least. The eye of any other beholder would have been smitten on the spot. Even Castor had to steel himself somewhat, lest he be enraptured by the sight of her. In presence alone she proved all but impossible to read. As if he were staring at a blank sheet of ice that reflected naught but his own image. This was unexpected. Radiant and gorgeous mithril armor shone like glittering diamonds on the woman's well-endowed figure. Cradled in her hands, a towering lance loomed. It should have been impossible to wield, and yet for her, it was held aloft as though it weighed no more than a twig. Pale hair the color of snow framed her face, reflecting eyes like harsh chips of ice. Long lashes fluttered open and shut, then open again, unable to meet his gaze for more than a mere moment. Those amethyst eyes seemed drenched by the night itself, cold and frozen. Stained by the night, twisted in madness. And yet she seemed frail. Composed of little more than glass. As though a harsh word would shatter her. A hesitant, weak smile graced her lips as she met his gaze. Brynhilde. She spoke softly, her words little more than a whisper, one his ears strained to catch. My class is Lancer. Please do not be kind to me, master. Naruto swallowed thickly. How the hell did I manage to summon a Lancer? I already fought one. So how is she here? The pale beauty standing prone before him provided no answers, only more confusion. I thought screwing with the Grail would land me something different, but this is, screw it. Guess I should be happy I didn't die. Alright, Naruto groaned, palming his face. I guess you've answered my question. But what are you? The pale woman tilted her head. Valkyrie. And you've gone and added more questions. Risking a glance at his hand, Castor sighed. Seemed fate had a sense of humor. The symbols formed a lance. 3 parts together? Well, shit. Turning his gaze to his new ally, Naruto carefully schooled his face into a calm mask and rose to his full height. Wouldn't do for him to appear flustered after all. He had no way of knowing if this ally would betray him or not. Geez, all this worrying was going to make him paranoid. Did Rin have to deal with this on a daily basis? No, he had more important matters to attend. Pivoting on one heel, he extended his hand, exposing his command seals. I need your help. This was the test. A simple one at that. If she tried to chop his hand off, he'd kill her on the spot. Before his eyes, the self-proclaimed Valkyrie straightened just so. His keen eyes didn't miss the motion. As if a switch had been flipped deep inside of her, so too did Lancer's body shift. Almost imperceptibly, a movement so minuscule, so tiny that most would have missed it outright. Not him. In a heartbeat she had readied herself for combat without the slightest hesitation, though against him or someone else, he knew not. Regardless, his opinion of this soft-spoken girl rose a bit more in that moment. Brynhilde, the throne supplied the rest. He'd really summoned someone troublesome. What are your orders, master? Where is the enemy? Castor's jaw nearly dropped open. Wait, just like that? The Valkyrie nodded slowly her head. You summoned me. As he looked on, her gauntlet fingers curled around her weapon, therefore I shall follow your orders. But, do not be kind to me. Because you'll end up trying to kill me. The whiskered warrior finished with a frown. Yeah, fuck that. I'm not going to treat you like a tool no matter how kindly you asked me to. A servant isn't a weapon to be pointed at one's enemy then thrown aside when they've exhausted their usefulness. You're a person. Don't forget that. Brynhilde stiffened at his response. But then I will. Kill me, right? A mute nod was her sole assent. Naruto sighed. Geez, she's broken. Then again, I suppose him too. Somewhat rattled by the reminder of his own flaws, Castor turned to depart, intent upon returning to the mansion before its occupants rose to find him gone. Even now he could feel Rin stirring. The effect of the spells he'd cast were wearing thin. She'd be up soon, and she would want answers. Demand, most likely. So would Ilya. The latter was likely going to want to flaunt her new body, which would likely provoke Tosaka in turn. And he was dragging an illegal servant into middle of it all. Troublesome. He really did have an energetic little master. Speaking of which. After a moment's consider he paused, favoring Brynhilde with a glance. Try to kill me as many times as you like. I'll survive. The Valkyrie favored his back with a wan smile. My, how terrifying, master. Scene break. How long was I out? Rin's shout reverberated through the empty halls of the Einsburn mansion with sound and aplomb, an indignant shout as horrified as it was outraged. Any sane fool would have cowered before it, servant or magus alike. Even the queen herself would have been given pause by Tosaka's rage. Not Castor. The surly servant took her anger in stride, letting it wash over him like water off a duck's back. Somehow, that only served to stoke the flames of Tosaka's confusion all the more. It had become abundantly clear that her body had sorely needed the rest. She hadn't expected to fall asleep in the morning and wake when it was night again. Ugh, this was going to play havoc with her internal clock. Putting that aside, why had she allowed herself to sleep this late in the first place? In the meager hours she'd allowed herself to sleep, her servant had been busy. Very busy indeed. What were those ice burns on his arms? Why did he look so banged up? Just what had she missed? Honestly, it made Rin want to give Castor a good hard shake. She drifted off for a few hours, trusting him to have the situation well in hand by the time she returned. After all, he'd just beaten Berserker within an inch of his lives, while emerging relatively unscathed. Then when she came back, he looked like this. Of course he had some explaining to do. She knew that face. He was hiding something from her, she just knew it. Even now she found herself forced to keep pace with him as he relentlessly marched ahead of her, leading her through the warren of corridors comprising the mansion. And then there was this woman. Aqua orbs flicked over her shoulder, regarding the enigmatic woman who Naruto affectionately addressed as his Lancer. Brynhildr scarcely met her gaze before averting her own. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? At first she'd refused to believe it. The idea that a servant, even one of Castor's caliber, summoning another was unheard of. You'd have to be ridiculously powerful and broken or both and be willing to risk catastrophe just by interacting with the Grail, let alone manipulating it remotely from a distance. But the seals on his hand were all too genuine to be dismissed. Somehow, someway, Uzumaki Naruto had managed to spit in the face of the Grail war and emerge relatively unscathed, judging by his cheery demeanor. Which meant she by definition now had another servant under her command. It was almost too good to be true. God, just how broken are you? Not so loud, master. Naruto yawned, palming his face. I'm kinda sleepy after all this. Still, I'm glad to see you're so lively after I put you under. Put me dash? So it was you? It was for your own good, I assure you. Castor soothed, patting her head in passing. Don't be like that. I learned something good while you were out. Now it was Tosaka's turn to flinch. Such as? Castor shrugged. Nothing important, save that the Holy Grail requires the sacrifice of 7 servants to function. Despite his accusation, he never missed a stride. Maybe you should have mentioned that earlier. He didn't even look at her as he spoke, further allowing the sheer enormity of his words sink in. Honestly, it makes a man wonder if you're planning to stab him in the back. Rin froze. I didn't know. In truth, she didn't. That part of her education had been conveniently absent. Either her father or that damn priest had deigned to mention it to her. Oh. A terrifying realization stole over her. If Naruto was sacrificed to the Grail, he wouldn't be able to get his wish. If he couldn't receive his long-cherished desire, then what reason did he have to serve her? Wait. Her mind kicked into overdrive when she saw him raise his hand. Was he going to kill her? He'd sworn his staff to her service, but this clearly constituted as a betrayal of his trust. Did that render the contract void? If so, could she stop him in time? She still had 3 command seals, but her servant had proven he was wickedly quick on the draw. His hand descended. And ruffled her hair. He grunted. I'll take your word for it then. You're not angry? Don't worry, master. The innocence of his smile rattled her more than his fury ever could. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I'm sure I can figure out a workaround. Puffing her cheeks, the Tosaka heiress averted her gaze, and here I thought you weren't going to give me preferential treatment. Naruto laughed. Why not? You've always been my goddess, haven't you? I like ya. Ding! Critical hit. Rin nearly tripped. Her lower lip trembled. Hands balled into fists at her side. A tide of conflicting emotions chased each other across her face, and despite her best efforts, Rin felt herself begin to blush. A slow, determined flush inexorably crawled up her neck, burning in her cheeks, searing her ears before finally working its way to her forehead. No! Not allowed. Not at all. This wasn't fair. Not even remotely. Her frazzled thoughts scattered to the winds, refusing to compose themselves despite her best efforts to marshal them in a scathing retort. Indeed, Tosaka was forced on the defensive by the blonde's casual remark. What was he thinking, saying that? In a fit of pique her hand shot out, snatching at his sleeve. Naruto paused, a note of confusion leaving him. Even then, Rin refused to release him. That's not fair, you can't just... Castor frowned slightly. can't just. Aha! A loud, determined voice interrupted their moment. There you are, Oni-chan. Why'd you put me to sleep? Irritated, Rin rounded on the newcomer with a growl, only for her words to trail off into a squeak. Eh? Ilya? Why do you look like? Naruto palmed his face. Such misfortune. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the Einsburn estate, Assassin laughed. A great whooping cackle tore out of him as he flailed about on the ground like a madman. Sandals kicking wildly in the air, he clutched at his side, to no avail. Oh, this is just too much. Truly, the sight laid before him was simply too much to bear. A great roaring guffaw ripped through the early morning as the once dead man doubled over and clutched at his aching sides. Broad shoulders trembled and he fought to restrain himself, only to fail spectacularly as a fresh fit of mirth unexpectedly seized him. His laughter sent several birds shrieking into the air, cawing furiously at being woken from their slumber. He cared not a whit for their plight. Indeed, one might say their anger made him cackle all the more. He was entirely too pleased to even notice. This made him glad to be alive again. This was just too much. That darn kid! He never ceased to amaze him. When had he become such a ladies' man? Truly, he had a reason to be merry for the first time in, well, a very long time. Putting his second chance at life aside, he'd been rather worried about the kid. No, not worried. He didn't worry. Call it curiosity. After all, he hadn't seen him in ages. So he'd watched. And he'd waited. And he saw. He hadn't been disappointed. He was doing just fine. How fortunate he'd been to receive such an understanding master. Pity he had to kill them both. Chapter 6, Long Live the King Interlude. What is the meaning of this, assassin? If he was at all offended by her remark, the servant did little to show it. Instead, he merely raised his palms before her to show himself unarmed. Harmless. As if an assassin could ever be such a thing. No, she would not lower her defenses for one such as this. Now. Don't be like that, Saber. His low, mellow voice rubbed pleasantly against her ears. Think of it as a token of goodwill. Ho? Saber felt her mouth curl down into an irritated grimace as she digested the information she'd just been fed. Why tell me this, then? I fail to see the purpose of revealing a contender in this war. That much remained true. For an enemy servant to simply appear on her doorstep and reveal the location of not one, not two, but 3 additional servants boggled the mind. Much less his claim that one of said servants had somehow managed to manipulate the greater Grail into doing his bidding. Really, it begged the obvious question. What do you seek to gain from this? A sly smile greeted her. Everything. That actually drew a blink from the golden-eyed servant. Assassin had spoken with such sincerity that she found herself hard-pressed to challenge him. There was no madness to be found in his gaze, only frozen resolve, an iron will to match her own. I beg your pardon? She sputtered. Simple. A lone finger rose to jab at the empty air between them. You're going to track down Castor, an old protégé of mine. You're going to pick a fight with him, because let's face it, in your current state you're just too damn proud to do anything else. And you're going to lose. A feral grin blossomed upon his tattooed face. Oh, you might get some licks and sure, but one way or another you'll suffer defeat at his hands. Eventually you'll join his side as a direct result of that defeat. Preposterous. Wait, it gets better. The lavishly clad man cackled. You see, the kid has a way of making enemies into allies. If he has his way, you might even see the error of your Shing. Excalibur arced out with bitter surety, alighting under the man's jaw. Choose your words with care, assassin. Saber hissed. Lest you find yourself without a head. You won't kill me. His expression didn't waver. I'm too valuable to you alive. Her posture relaxed minutely. Blunt of you. My master's been running me ragged from the moment he summoned me. The older man admitted with a sheepish shrug, causing his coat to flare about his shoulders. Frankly, I'd tell you how to kill the old worm outright and bind myself to someone else, if he hadn't silenced me with a command spell. Really, this is just a roundabout way of getting him out of my hair. Poison irises flicked downward, measuring the distance between them. Even without her armor to protect her, Saber remained confident she could survive Assassin's first strike. From there, it would be a matter of speed. It was here that her mind grew uncertain. Just how agile was this old man? In the end, her bottomless curiosity won the day. You intend to rid yourself of your master? She inquired, edging closer. How so? Either he uses up his commands and thereby looses his hold over me, or one of you slip by and kill him. The man's painted face creased in a small smile. You might have to deal with Ryder's master in the offing, but I consider that a win-win by comparison. Don't think the kid would let you hurt her. Ryder's master? The plot was beginning to thicken and she wasn't sure she liked it. Here did Assassin's face turn contemplative. Against his better judgment he turned, presenting his back to her. All in favor of watching the rising sun. Thumbing his chin, the killer favored her with a wry glance. She's in a bad way, that one. He murmured. I'd like to help her if I could, but Ryder's just so damn stubborn. You lot really need to learn to trust people, sometimes. I trust no one. Saber growled. The man laughed at her. More fool you. There was something distinctly wrong about him, not in his face, or clothes, or even that sly, jovial manner. She could still comprehend the concept of assassin in her mind's eye, but anything related to his appearance seemed to slip through her fingers when she sought to grasp it. No, she couldn't hold the memory of him in her mind. Merely looking away threatened to scrub all thoughts of him from her mind. When she'd first glanced away, she'd nearly forgotten his appearance entirely. Even now it was only with a supreme effort that she found herself able to maintain her mental image of him. A frightful skill indeed. Or was it a noble phantasm? Regardless, the owner of said skill had seen fit to visit her at the crack of dawn without her master's knowledge. And while he slept, no less. If Artoria was entirely honest with herself, Shiro was an acceptable master. For now. Also a more than adequate cook given her voracious appetite. A normal magus he might not be, and while he might not be able to supply her with the full amount of prana she required, he had enough sense to know when to step back and let her fight. Now if only he'd abandon his morals alongside that absurd dream of his. Save everyone? Impossible. This boy was somehow even more naive than the one she'd known. Still, his foolishness had proved a boon in at least one aspect. Her unwitting master wasn't idiotic enough to charge headlong into a battle he barely understood. Better that he didn't know she was feasting on the souls of the innocent. After all, if the alternative meant disappearing. Still, she was loath to lower her guard, least of all when faced with one such as this. Whomever assassin was or claimed to be, he clearly hailed from a different land than she. His stark appearance and cordial grin suggested kindness, but belied an inner menace that set her nerves on edge. This was one to be watched. Judging by his appearance, she would place him as an Asian, but beyond that she knew nothing of him. Whatever legend he hailed from remained steeped in mystery, and that damned skill wasn't helping matters any. Do we have an accord then? A lightly armored hand extended in friendship. I tell you where to find Castor, and you swear not to seek me out. Very well. Saber clicked her tongue in distaste. Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered her blade. You're a strange one, assassin. I don't understand you. Not much to understand. The ancient warrior riposted. I have a wish of my own and I'll do whatever it takes to see it through. If I can talk my student into letting me have it, all the better. If not, it's nothing personal. He shrugged loosely. It's war, after all. One I intend to win. I was quite the spymaster back in my day, I'll have you know. Suppose that gives me a leg up on you kids. Saber Alter bristled. I'll thank you not to call me such. She growled. Sweetheart, when you've been around as long as I have, everyone's a child by comparison. Unruly coot H. You are aware that I seek my own restitution from the Grail? Of course you do. He waved her warning aside as though it were little more than an afterthought. As for Castor, you'll find him in a wooded area not far from here. He's cozied up with that Einsburn girl you were hunting earlier. They're going to give you quite the bout, I expect. Her pride rankled at the slight. I relish the challenge, assassin. A small, sad smile plucked at the corner of his mouth. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. You dare? In that moment her temper finally slipped its leash. Excalibur burst forward in a bold bolt of black, skewering the pale-haired man through the chest before he could react. A pang of regret lanced through her breast, but she stubbornly thrust it aside as she wrenched the blade in the wound. And tasted smoke. Much to her dismay, her sword sliced through empty air as a fresh plume of white smoke greeted her weapon. A harsh peal of hysterical laughter echoed into the gloom, causing her to whirl, but she found no blade in her back. Only that low, mocking voice trampling over the tattered remnants of her pride. Do you flee, coward? The laughter only redoubled. I prefer the term tactical retreat. It's been fun, Saber. Give the kid my regards. 00000. Why lure us to this place? Not just to fight. No, you're protecting something, someone. Naruto heard the words as though from a great distance. Yet all he felt was confusion. He opened his eyes and found not the four walls of the Einsburn mansion, but a wooded grove. A full moon hung overhead, blood red with warning. His limbs moved stiffly, as though they were mired in mud. Why was he here? He didn't know. Couldn't remember. His last coherent memory consisted of speaking with Rin, of closing his eyes for a heartbeat. Was he asleep? Did a servant even require such? The knowledge escaped him when he reached for it. Unbidden, his lips moved of their own accord. And if I am? His tactical mind analyzed the situation instantly as he be. A blonde woman wearing some foreign style he didn't recognize, her hair styled in golden ringlets. A man with stark white hair, clad in red. The former sneered at him. Then grovel. Submit yourself to me and I might spare her, Castor. Despite his confusion, his mouth moved of its own accord and a bitter laugh burst out of him. I will never submit. My soul is sworn to her. You can stick me full of arrows, you can stab me with unlimited blades, but I won't turn on her. I have my honor. Something your archer knows nothing about. Ain't that right, Yamaiwai? Grunting, he forced himself to his feet. That's right. I know who you are. Come on then, Mr. X-Hero. He beckoned, swaying on his feet. You might kill me, but I'll make you work for it. I'll kick your arse so hard that even that stupid Shiro's gonna feel it. The blonde grimaced. So be it. Archer, by the power of my command seal, I order you to. Crunch. She swayed as something struck her from behind. What? Why am I? In disbelief, she looked down to see a hand protruding from her chest. Startled to see blood. Her blood. But that's cheating. It wasn't Castor's hand. Nor was this archer. It belonged to 0000. Wake up, damn you! Blue eyes jolted open with a start, jolted from the dream at once. For a fleeting instant his mind reeled in a stupor, unable to decipher his surroundings, much less the face looming over him. The room swam around him like a storm-tossed raft caught in a wild sea, nearly taking his sense of reason with it. This wasn't his room. That certainly wasn't her? What? When? Where? Why? Thankfully, sanity reasserted itself moments later, preventing a panic attack from claiming what little remained of his reason. Through bleary eyes he beheld Rin's pensive expression. Brynhilde, of course, was nowhere to be seen. When in blazes. It was then that rest of his senses descended on him with a vengeance. In that instant he became keenly aware of a faint weight resting against his chest, accompanied by a faint scent he couldn't readily identify. A pair of slim legs twined between his, trapping him where he lay. The softest sigh wafted through his ears, fanning a faint ember of confusion to life amidst his thoughts. When he finally dared to raise his gaze, a curtain of stark white hair dominated his vision. It didn't take him long to put two and two together. Ilya? Oh. Right. Ilya. He'd crafted a new body for her. Hadn't he? Still, that failed to bridge the gap between then and now. When had he fallen asleep? More aptly, when had she crawled atop him? This was, of course, made all the more murderous by the fact that the Einsburned homunculus no longer retained her childlike form. If his master's thunderous visage was anything to go by, she'd chosen quite the compromising position. Any last words? She chirped sweetly. Naruto swallowed thickly. I can explain. Can you? Not really, no, he gulped. Way. As luck would have it, Ilya chose that moment to stir. Morning, Oniai-chan. Eyes the color of bloody rubies drifted open to meet his own. Rather than panic, which honestly would have been preferable by this point, she simply offered a quiet meal and nuzzled her head beneath his chin. Judging by the choking sound Rin made, she'd just suffered a stroke. Ilya's smug expression certainly wasn't helping matters any. Ah. So this was it then. This was how his second life ended. Such misfortune. Why was he afflicted with such ill luck? Irk. I didn't know you could sleep. Mana intensive, remember? Pearly white teeth flashed out at her in a false grin. Had to take a nap. So you're running out of mana then? Rin's sweet smile eyes didn't diminish in the least. Anything else you'd like to divulge, Caster? Unless you're suggesting I start devouring the souls of the innocent, no. The blonde shook his head. I don't think so. When she didn't challenge him, he allowed a waspish note to creep into his voice. Right then. I'll just pop down to the nearest police station and have a snack, shall I? It was precisely the wrong thing to say. Rin absolutely hissed. Oh ho? A wild look flashed through those aquamarine orbs, like embers of a dying fire just waiting to spring back to life. Naruto opened his mouth to retort, only to close it just as quickly. While it could certainly be said that he did enjoy teasing Rin from time to time, he was wary of pushing her too far. After all, the spunky little magus still had several command spells to bully him with if she so chose. Moreover, she'd had something of a stressful day. Should she take it into her head to seek retribution upon him, well... Enough excuses, Caster. She bit out. We need to see that damned priest. Fuckery we going to church for? He whined. Tosaka favored him with a dark look. Best that you don't ask. That's it for part 2. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.